She worked 3 jobs, clocked 16 hours most days, and had not sat down long enough for her back to stop hurting in 12 years. He wore a white coat, held a medical degree, and stood behind a microphone while 400 people applauded. She was in row 14. He was about to say 2 words. She was still smiling. She had not heard them yet. Her hands had learned the schedule the way hands learn things when rest is not an option. They moved on their own. They knew what came next before she did. The alarm went off at 4:40 a.m. Ruth Delane had stopped hearing it as a sound years ago. It was just a border between one kind of tired and another, the signal that the first shift was starting and the body needed to get vertical regardless of what it wanted. She dressed in the dark the way she had dressed in the dark for 12 years. Scrubs, compression socks, the white nursing shoes with the sole wearing thin on the left heel because she favored that leg when she stood for hours. She did not turn on the light. The studio apartment was small enough that her hands knew the dresser, the doorknob, the kitchen counter without help. She ate a piece of toast with peanut butter standing at the counter. That was breakfast. That was most mornings. She drank water from the tap and swallowed 3 ibuprofen without looking at the bottle because the bottle was always in the same place and the dosage was always the same and the pain was always in the same spot, the low back left of center, the L4 vertebra. She knew this because she was a nurse. She knew she needed an MRI. She did not go because an MRI was not in the envelope this week. The envelope lived in the top drawer of the dresser, and whatever was left after Marcus's tuition payment and the electric bill was what she had. The MRI could wait. The MRI had been waiting for 2 years. She drove to Maplewood Senior Living in the dark. The parking lot was empty, except for the night shift cars and the delivery truck that came early on Tuesdays. She clocked in at 5:15 a.m. and went to room 14 first, because Mr. Clarence Washington in room 14 could not turn himself in the night, and if no one turned him before 6 a.m., his skin would break down in the specific way that skin breaks down when the body beneath it has stopped cooperating. She turned him gently. She changed the sheets beneath him while he was still in the bed, a skill that required a specific combination of strength and softness that only comes from years of doing it. Her hands moved under his shoulders along his back, repositioning him with the kind of care you cannot teach in a classroom. You learn it the way you learn anything that matters, by doing it when you are too tired to do it, and doing it well anyway. The room smelled the way rooms in nursing homes smell at 5 inches the morning. Antiseptic and something warmer underneath, something human and specific and unavoidable. She had gotten used to it the way she had gotten used to most things. She talked to Mr. Washington while she worked the same low, steady voice she had used to sing Marcus to sleep when he was small. Mr. Washington could not respond, but his breathing changed when she talked, and she believed this meant something, and she continued. She finished her rounds by 1:30 p.m. She changed her shoes in the parking lot, sitting in the driver's seat of her car, with the door open, pulling off the white nursing shoes and putting on the black flats. The flats were for the dental office. She could not wear nursing shoes to a reception desk. She pressed her thumb into the low back left side, the place where the pain lived. She held it there for 4 seconds. That was not treatment. That was acknowledgement. The dental office was clean and cold, and she sat behind the front desk from 1:00 p.m. to 5:30 p.m., scheduling appointments, answering phones, filing insurance claims. Her back hurt when she sat. It also hurt when she stood. There was no position that did not hurt, so she chose the one the job required and did not mention it. At 6:15 p.m., she was in her car again, driving to the law office on Peachtree, where she cleaned from 7:00 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. The building was empty by then. She vacuumed the conference rooms, wiped down the kitchen, cleaned the bathrooms. She worked in silence, except for the sound of the vacuum, and when she was on the upper floor and certain no one was in the building, the sound of her phone on speaker. She called Marcus on these evenings. She had been calling Marcus on these evenings for years. The calls had once been long. He would tell her about a class, a professor, a patient he had seen during rounds. She would listen while she wiped down tables, and he would ask if she was tired, and she would say she was fine. The calls had gotten shorter. Last Tuesday the call lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The Tuesday before he had not picked up. She had called twice, and he had not picked up, and she had left no message because she did not know what message to leave for a person who used to talk to you for an hour and now gives you 2 minutes and a reason to hang up. She did not know why the calls were getting shorter. She told herself it was because he was busy. Medical school was hard, residency applications were coming, he had responsibilities. She told herself this and believed it partially. She finished the law office at 10:20 p.m. She drove home. She parked. She climbed the stairs to the studio apartment and sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her shoes, the left one first, then the right, the way you undo hard things, one step at a time. Before she turned off the light, she reached into the top drawer of the nightstand and took out a small tin box. Inside the tin box was a card. The card was written in pencil, in the handwriting of an 8-year-old boy, the letters slanting slightly to the right the way left-handed children's letters do. It said, "Mom, when I'm a doctor, I'll buy you a house with a garden." The pencil had faded. The paper had gone soft at the edges from years of being held. She read it. She put it back. She turned off the light. She did not cry. She had spent 12 years learning how not to cry about things she could not change, and the learning had been thorough. Marcus Delane, at 8 years old, sat on the kitchen floor with his math workbook open on his knees, while his mother stood at the stove, making rice and beans after her night shift. This was their arrangement. She cooked. He did homework. The kitchen was small, and the floor was linoleum, and he sat cross-legged with his back against the cabinet below the sink, because that was the spot where he could see her, and she could see him, and neither of them had to say anything, for the room to feel full. He watched her hands. She stirred the pot with one hand and held her back with the other, pressing her thumb into the same spot she always pressed, and he did not know what L4 meant, but he knew the spot. He knew the gesture. After dinner he would sit on the couch beside her and take her right hand in both of his and press his thumbs into her palm the way she had shown him. Her hands were dry and rough, and the skin across the knuckles was cracked in places, and he pressed carefully around the cracks because he did not want to hurt her, and because these hands were the most important objects in his world, and he treated them accordingly. She would close her eyes when he did this. She would lean her head back against the couch and she would not say anything, and he understood that this was the closest thing to rest. She had these minutes on the couch with her son's small hands on her hands, and he took the responsibility seriously. He said one evening while pressing her palm, "When I am a doctor, you will not have to work 3 jobs anymore." She opened her eyes and looked at him. She smiled. She said, "Just the one is fine. The one where I sit down." He laughed. She laughed. It was not a complicated moment. It was the kind of moment that lives in a house for years without anyone photographing it or writing it down, and it becomes the truest thing about that house long after everything else has changed. He was 10 when he wrote the card. He sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a piece of cardstock he had taken from the art supplies at school, and he wrote it carefully, pressing hard because he wanted the words to last. "Mom, when I'm a doctor, I'll buy you a house with a garden." He gave it to her on a Tuesday evening for no occasion. She held it for a long time. She put it in a tin box on her nightstand, and she did not tell him that she read it every night because she did not want him to feel the weight of being someone's reason for continuing. That was not a weight for a 10-year-old to carry. She carried it instead. Marcus at 14 was different. Not in the ways that all children are different at 14, though he was different in those ways too. He was different in a specific way that Ruth saw and did not name, because naming it would have made it something she had to respond to, and she did not know how to respond to it. He had gotten a partial scholarship to Whitfield Academy, a private school. The other students had 2 parents and 1 house and no jobs between them that required a uniform with a logo on the back. Marcus was smart, and he was proud, and he was 14, and he understood already that there was a gap between the world he came from and the world he was entering, and the gap was not just money, it was the way people carried themselves. The things they did not have to explain, the ease. Ruth drove to pick him up on a Wednesday afternoon. She had come from the law office. She had not had time to change. She was wearing the cleaning company polo navy blue with the logo on the back, and she was standing beside her car in the pickup line when she saw Marcus come out the front doors of the school with 2 other boys. He saw her from the top of the steps. She saw the moment he saw her. She saw something cross his face that she had never seen before, a quick calculation, a decision made in the body before the mind has time to intervene. He turned. He said something to the boys beside him. He walked around the side of the building and came out through the back gate and walked to the car from the other direction so that the boys he had been walking with did not see him get into a car with a woman wearing a cleaning company uniform. Ruth saw all of this. She saw it with the specific clarity of a person who watches carefully because watching is the only thing she can do. She did not mention it. She drove home. She ate dinner alone that night because Marcus said he had homework and took his plate to his room. She washed the dishes. She went to bed. She did not mention it the next morning or any morning after. That same semester, Marcus began spending time at the home of a classmate named Derek Ashford. Derek's mother was a woman named Victoria Ashford. Marcus mentioned her once, then twice, then regularly, and each time her name entered the apartment, it occupied a slightly larger space. Ruth noted this. She said nothing about it. She added it to the list of things she carried without putting down. Victoria Ashford lived in a house with a circular driveway and a front door that was painted the exact shade of green you see in magazines about homes you will never own. She was married to Dr. Leonard Ashford, a cardiothoracic surgeon at Emory who played golf on Saturdays and had the kind of handshake that made you feel like you had been evaluated and approved in the same gesture. They had one son, Derek, who was in Marcus's class at Whitfield. Victoria was not a villain. That is important to understand because what happened next was not theft. It was erosion. The slow wearing away of a shoreline by water that does not know it is destroying anything. Water just moves. It goes where the path is easiest. Victoria went where she was welcomed, and Marcus welcomed her because she offered something he did not have a name for yet. Ease. The first time Marcus went to the Ashford house for dinner, he was 15. He came home that night and told Ruth about it the way you tell someone about a country you have visited for the first time. The dining room had a table that sat 8. There were cloth napkins. Dr. Ashford asked him about his grades, and when Marcus said he was interested in medicine, Dr. Ashford leaned back in his chair and said, "Good, we need more young men like you." And the word we landed on Marcus in a way that Ruth's encouragement never had. Not because Ruth's was less sincere, because Dr. Ashford was already inside the world Marcus was trying to enter, and his approval came with a key attached. Victoria began inviting Marcus regularly. Dinners became weekends. Weekends became holidays. She took Derek and Marcus to visit college campuses during spring break. She introduced Marcus to colleagues of her husband, surgeons and internists and department chairs who shook his hand the way Dr. Ashford shook hands with evaluation and approval built into the grip. She paid for his MCAT prep course. She did this without asking Ruth. She told Marcus it was an investment in his future and that he should not feel guilty about accepting help from people who believed in him. The word investment was specific. Ruth had never used that word. Ruth used words like manage and stretch and figure it out. Ruth's vocabulary was the vocabulary of survival. Victoria's was the vocabulary of strategy. Marcus was 17. He did not yet understand that both languages were love. He only understood that one of them felt lighter to carry. He came home one evening wearing a shirt Ruth had never seen, light blue Oxford cloth, the kind with a small emblem on the chest. She looked at it from across the kitchen, the way you look at something that has appeared in your house without explanation. She said, "Where did you get that shirt?" He said, "Mrs. Ashford gave it to me. She said I needed one for the hospital tour." Ruth looked at the shirt. She looked at the collar, the cuffs, the way it fit him like it had been chosen by someone who knew his size. She said nothing. That night, she took it from the laundry pile and washed it with the rest of his clothes. She folded it and put it in his drawer. She did this without comment, without expression, without any outward indication that she understood what she was doing. She was washing evidence that someone else was dressing her son for a life she was paying for with her body. The calls shifted. Marcus began saying Mrs. A instead of Mrs. Ashford. The abbreviation was small, but Ruth heard it the way nurses hear changes in a patient's breathing. A shortening, a familiarity, a closing of distance that meant the distance somewhere else was growing. He talked about dinners at the Ashford house the way he used to talk about their kitchen, with the specific warmth of someone describing home. Ruth did not say, "Stop going there." She did not say, "I am your mother, not her." She did not say any of the things that lived in the back of her throat on the nights when Marcus came home smelling like a house that had candles and a dishwasher and a father who was home for dinner. She said none of it, because she was afraid that saying it would make her the thing standing between Marcus and the life she was working 3 jobs to give him. So she said nothing. She went to work. She came home. She washed the shirts that someone else bought for her son, and she folded them and she put them in his drawer, and she did not mention it. The year Marcus left for college was the year Ruth sold the house. It was a small house on a quiet street, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, with a window above the sink where she had stood thousands of times washing dishes and watching Marcus play in the yard. She had bought it with 15 years of saving. Not investing, saving. The difference between those 2 words was the difference between Ruth's life and Victoria Ashford's life, and Marcus was learning the second language faster than he had ever spoken the first. She sold it because tuition was $54,000 a year, and the scholarship covered a third, and the rest came from somewhere, and somewhere was the house. She moved into the studio apartment on Piedmont, 400 square feet, 1 window, a kitchen that was also the living room, that was also the bedroom. She set up the nightstand. She put the tin box in the top drawer. She went to work the next morning at 4:40 a.m. The way she went to work every morning, because the body had learned the schedule, and the schedule did not account for grief. The years that followed were a specific kind of arithmetic. Marcus needed books. Marcus needed equipment. Marcus needed board exam fees. Each need arrived as a phone call, brief and practical, the voice of a young man who had learned to ask for money the way you ask a bank, with the expectation that the transaction would be completed and the conversation would end. He called one evening during her shift at the law office. She was on the 3rd floor vacuuming the conference room. She turned off the vacuum and answered. He said he needed $800 for Step 1 materials. He said it was due by Friday. He said he was sorry to ask. She said, "I will figure it out." He did not ask what figure it out meant. He did not ask if she had $800. He did not ask how she was or whether her back still hurt or whether she was eating. He said, "Thanks, Mom," and hung up. She stood in the conference room with the phone in her hand and the vacuum at her feet and the $800 already being subtracted from the envelope in her mind. She would skip the dental cleaning she had scheduled. She would eat rice and beans for 2 weeks instead of 1. She would figure it out the way she always figured it out, by removing herself from the equation, 1 piece at a time. He did not ask. She did not tell. Her hands had started shaking 6 months earlier. Not all the time. Just when she was tired, which was most of the time. A tremor in the right hand, fine, barely visible unless you were looking for it. She was looking for it because she was a nurse, and she knew what a tremor in the dominant hand at her age could mean, and she also knew what it probably meant in her case, which was that her body was running out of whatever it had been, running on for 12 years, and was beginning to send notices. She ignored the notices. She took 4 ibuprofen in the morning instead of 3, and then she stopped counting, because counting meant tracking, and tracking meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant stopping, and she did not know how to stop. She had never known how to stop. Stopping was not in the vocabulary of survival. The ibuprofen lived next to the sink in the studio apartment, beside the water glass that was always there, beside the toothbrush that needed replacing, beside the small mirror she avoided after 10 p.m. Because the woman in the mirror at 10 p.m. looked older than the woman she thought she was. The face in the mirror had lines that told time more honestly than any clock, and the hands in the mirror shook when they were not holding something, and the eyes in the mirror were tired in a way that sleep could not fix, because the tiredness was not in the muscles. It was underneath them. She read the card every night. The pencil had faded until you had to hold it at an angle to catch the light. The paper had gone soft, but the words were still there. "Mom, when am a doctor ill, buy you a house with a garden." She placed it on her chest and closed her eyes, and the weight of it was nothing and everything. Then the invitation arrived. It came in the mail on a Thursday, a thick envelope with embossed lettering, the kind of envelope that costs more to print than Ruth spent on groceries in a week. She opened it standing at the kitchen counter. Marcus James Delane, Doctor of Medicine. She read his name. She read it again. She held the invitation in both hands, and she looked at those 7 words, and her legs decided without consulting her that they were finished standing. She sat down on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet below the sink, the same spot where Marcus used to sit with his math workbook, the same linoleum, the same cabinet, the same floor. She did not cry. She laughed. A sound she had not made in a long time, involuntary and real, the sound of a woman who had spent 12 years converting her body into someone else's future and was now holding the receipt. She sat on that floor for a long time. She held the invitation against her chest the way she held the card every night. She thought about the 3 jobs and the sold house and the ibuprofen and the shaking hands and the shirts she had washed that someone else had bought. She thought about all of it, and she laughed again because the math had finally come out even. The cost and the result were in the same room for the first time in 12 years, and the result was written in embossed letters on a thick piece of paper, and his name was on it. She did not yet know what would happen at that ceremony. She was still in the version of the story where everything she had given was about to be acknowledged. She was still smiling. The morning of the ceremony, Ruth woke without the alarm. Her body knew this was a different day, the way bodies know things, in the muscles and the breathing and the specific quality of alertness that comes when something you have been waiting for has finally arrived. She showered and stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at herself with an attention she normally reserved for patients. She saw the gray in her hair, more than she remembered, concentrated at the temples and spreading back. She saw the lines around her eyes that deepened when she was tired, which was always. She saw her hands still slightly swollen from yesterday's shift, the knuckles dry, a callus on the right palm from the mop handle, and another at the base of the left thumb from turning patients. She put on the dress. It was navy blue with small white buttons down the front, and she had bought it at a store she normally walked past without entering. She had tried it on in the fitting room, and stood in front of the 3-way mirror and looked at herself from angles she did not normally see, and the woman in the mirror looked like someone who might sit in the front row of a graduation ceremony, someone whose son was about to become a doctor, someone who had earned the right to be there. She put on her mother's earrings. They were small gold studs, the only jewelry she still owned, the only thing she had kept when she sold everything else that could be converted into tuition. She fastened them carefully, one ear then the other, and touched them once, with her fingertips, the way you touch things that carry more meaning than their size suggests. She took the tin box from the nightstand drawer and opened it and took out the card. She wrapped it in a piece of tissue paper, folding the edges neatly, the way she folded everything with the care of a person who has learned that small things deserve the same attention as large ones. She placed it in her purse, beside her wallet, and her keys, and her bus pass. She had planned what she would say when she gave it to him. She had practiced it in her head on the bus rides home from the law office, the words forming and reforming in the dark, while the city slid past the windows. She would find him after the ceremony. She would take it out of her purse. She would hand it to him, and she would say, "I kept your promise for you. Now you can keep it yourself." She locked the apartment and walked to the bus stop. The morning was warm and bright, and the kind of morning that felt like it was cooperating with something. The bus came at 8:15. She got on and sat in the back row and held her purse on her lap with both hands. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary Saturday morning way. A man walked a dog. A woman watered plants on a balcony. 2 teenagers sat on a curb sharing a bag of chips. Life, in its ordinary configuration, none of it aware that on this particular bus, in this particular seat, a woman in a navy blue dress was riding toward the single event that 12 years of 3 jobs and a sold house and a shaking hand had been building toward. She arrived at the university 40 minutes early. She found the auditorium. She chose a seat in row 14 because the front rows were reserved for faculty, and she did not want to be in the way, and because row 14 was close enough to see his face clearly when he walked across the stage. She sat down. She placed her purse on her lap. She adjusted her mother's earrings. She waited. The auditorium filled slowly around her families with cameras and flowers, fathers in suits, mothers in dresses they had chosen with the same care she had chosen hers. She watched them, and she felt for the first time in a very long time that she belonged in a room. That the room had been built for exactly this purpose, and she had paid the price of admission in full, and the seat was hers. She was still smiling when the lights dimmed. She was still smiling when the dean began to speak. She was still smiling when the names began to be called one by one in alphabetical order and the letters moved closer to D. Marcus James Delane was the 37th name called. Ruth counted. She had been counting since the letter A, tracking the alphabet the way she tracked shift hours, with the specific patience of someone who has spent a lifetime waiting for things that required waiting. When they called his name, she leaned forward in her seat. Row 14. She could see him clearly. He stood from his chair on the stage and walked to the podium, and the dean shook his hand, and he received the diploma, and he was in that moment everything she had built. She did not think the word son. She thought the word work. That is what stood up there in that white coat. 12 years of 440 alarms and 3 shifts, and ibuprofen and an envelope in a drawer and a house she no longer owned. 12 years of hands that shook and a back that ached at L4 and phone calls that got shorter and shirts she washed that someone else had bought. All of it was standing on that stage in a white coat, and the coat was clean and pressed, and his posture was straight, and his name had the word doctor in front of it, and that word had cost her everything she had and most of what she was. She was aware of her hands on her purse, the tin box inside it, the card wrapped in tissue paper. She had the words ready. I kept your promise for you. Now you can keep it yourself. Marcus returned to his seat. The names continued. After the last degree was conferred, the dean invited select graduates to offer brief remarks. Marcus was among them. She knew this already because the invitation had mentioned it, and she had read the invitation 14 times. He walked to the microphone. He looked out at the auditorium. 400 people. Families. Faculty. The specific quality of light in a large room full of people who are all looking at the same person. He was calm. He was composed. He looked like a man who belonged exactly where he was standing, and Ruth understood that this was also something she had built, this composure, this belonging, even if the materials had come from places she had not chosen. He thanked the faculty. He thanked his classmates. He thanked the institution. Then he paused. The pause had a quality to it, a deliberateness, the way a person pauses when they are about to say the thing they have been building toward. He said, I want to thank the woman who made all of this possible. The woman who believed in me before I believed in myself. The woman who opened doors for me that I did not even know existed and showed me what it looked like to live a life of purpose and generosity. Mom, could you please stand up? Ruth's body responded before her mind caught up. Her hands released the purse. Her feet pressed into the floor. Her knees straightened. Her back, the back that hurt at L4, that hurt when she sat and when she stood and when she lay down, that back straightened itself the way it had not straightened in years, because this was the moment, this was the thing the back had been carrying everything toward. She was halfway to standing when she realized he was not looking at her. He was looking to the right. 3rd row. Ale seat. Victoria Ashford was rising from her chair with her hand on her chest and a specific expression on her face that Ruth recognized because she had seen it on the faces of patients' families when they received good news. Gratitude performed with grace. Victoria was standing. The auditorium was applauding. Dr. Ashford beside her was smiling. Derek was holding up his phone to record the moment. Ruth was still halfway up, her knees bent, her back, which had straightened itself for the first time in years, curved again. She sat down. The motion was small. The seat absorbed her weight without sound. The man beside her did not look over. The woman on her other side was clapping. She sat back down. No one noticed. The applause continued. Victoria raised her hand in a small wave composed elegant the wave of a woman who was accustomed to being acknowledged in rooms. Marcus smiled at her from the stage. The specific quality of that smile was something Ruth saw from row 14 with the clarity of a person who had spent 18 years studying that face from across kitchen tables and in rear-view mirrors and through cracked bedroom doors at night. It was a real smile. He was not performing. He meant it. Ruth sat in her seat. She did not move. The ceremony continued around her. More remarks. More applause. A song from the university choir. The recessional. People stood. People hugged. People took photographs. The room filled with the specific noise of completion of a thing having been finished, a future's beginning. She did not stand. She sat in row 14 with her purse on her lap and the tin box inside the purse, and the card inside the tin box, and the words inside the card, and the promise inside the words, and all of it sitting there in the weight on her thighs, while 400 people moved around her toward the exits and toward the lobby and toward the rest of their lives. Her hands were on the purse. They were not shaking. They were very still. The specific stillness of hands that have decided there is nothing left to reach for. She waited until the row was nearly empty. She stood. She walked to the aisle. She walked toward the exit. She did not look toward the stage. She did not look toward the third row. She walked the way she walked through the law office at 10 p.m. Efficiently, without unnecessary movement, the body doing what it had been trained to do in spaces where it did not belong. The lobby was full of people. She moved through them. She reached the glass doors. She pushed through, and the outside air hit her face, and it was warm and bright, and the parking lot was full of cars she did not own. She stood at the edge of the lot. Through the glass doors behind her, she could see the lobby. She could see Marcus. He was standing with the Ashfords. Victoria had her arm around his shoulders. Dr. Ashford was shaking his hand. Derek was beside them. They were laughing. Someone was taking a photograph. Marcus stood in the center of these people with his diploma in his hand and his white coat on his shoulders, and he looked like he belonged to them. Ruth looked at Victoria's hand on her son's shoulder. She looked at the specific placement of it, the casual weight, the familiarity. She knew that hand's position. She had placed her own hand in that exact spot 10,000 times. On the couch, after dinner, in the car on the way to school, in the kitchen while he did homework on the floor. Her hand had lived there for 18 years, and now another hand was in its place, and Marcus was not moving away from it. She turned. She walked to the bus stop. She sat on the bench. She opened her purse and took out the tin box, and opened it, and took out the card wrapped in tissue paper, and unwrapped it, and held it, and read it one more time. Mom, when am a doctor ill buy you a house with a garden? She folded it. She put it back in the tissue paper. She put the tissue paper back in the tin box. She closed the tin box. She put the tin box back in her purse. She closed her purse. She did not cry. She had spent 12 years learning not to cry at work. The bus stop felt like work. The parking lot felt like work. The auditorium had felt like work. Everything felt like work now, because work was the only mode that her body understood. The only setting that did not require her to feel what had just happened, and her body had chosen it automatically, the way it chose everything without asking permission. The bus came. She got on. She sat in the back. She rode home. The city passed the windows in its ordinary way, indifferent to whatever was happening inside any one person, on any one bus, on any one Saturday afternoon. She got home. She went inside. She took off the navy blue dress and hung it in the closet. She put on the cleaning company polo. She put on the black pants. She put on the shoes with the worn left heel. She looked at the clock. She had 40 minutes before the evening shift at the law office. She made herself a piece of toast. She did not put peanut butter on it. She ate it standing at the counter. She drank water from the tap. The world did not pause because something inside her had. She went to work. That same evening, Marcus Delane sat in the back seat of the Ashford family's car as it moved through the city toward the restaurant where they had reservations. He was still wearing the white coat. Victoria was beside him. She had her hand on his arm, and she was telling him about the reservation and the champagne she had ordered in advance and the toast Dr. Ashford was planning to give. Marcus listened. He nodded. He responded in the right places. He was performing the version of himself that this car required. The version that had been shaped over years of dinners at that table that sat 8 of campus tours and MCAT prep and hospital introductions. He was performing it well because he had been practicing for a long time, and practice makes the performance smooth enough that the performer sometimes forgets it is a performance. Victoria said, "I am so proud of you." She said it with warmth. She meant it. He heard it. He did not correct her. He did not say, "She is not my mother." He did not say, "The woman who paid for my medical school is sitting on a bus right now in a cleaning company uniform." He did not say any of this, because saying it would have broken something in the car in the evening, in the version of himself that he had spent years constructing, and he was not ready to break it. His silence was not cruelty. It was not calculated. It was the silence of a young man who had been moving away from one world and toward another for so long that the distance had become a structure, a building he lived in, and he did not know how to leave it without the whole thing coming down. He knew Ruth had been at the ceremony. He had seen her in row 14. He had seen the navy blue dress. He had seen the small gold earrings. He had seen her begin to stand when he said the word mom, and he had seen her sit back down. He had seen all of it. The decision had not been made on the stage. The decision had been made months earlier in the Ashford living room, rehearsing his remarks. Victoria had been sitting across from him listening, and when he finished, she had said casually, almost as an afterthought, "Are you going to mention me?" He had not said no. That was the moment. Not the stage, not the microphone, not the word "Mom." The moment was in a living room when a question was asked, and he did not say no, and the not saying became a direction, and the direction became a speech, and the speech became a public thing that could not be taken back. He understood what he had done. He understood it the way you understand something you are not yet able to look at directly, the way you understand a shape in your peripheral vision that you know is there, but cannot turn toward, because turning toward it would require seeing it fully, and seeing it fully would require doing something about it. He looked at his phone. There were 4 missed calls from Ruth. No voicemails. She had called 4 times and left no message because she did not know what message to leave, and because the silence was its own message, and she knew this even if she did not want to know it. He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked out the window. The city moved past in its ordinary way. Victoria said something about the dessert menu. Derek laughed. Dr. Ashford adjusted the rearview mirror. Marcus did not call back. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Ruth stopped reading the card. She did not make a decision about it. She did not say to herself, "I am done with this card," or "I am putting this away." She simply did not reach for the tin box before turning off the light one night, and then she did not reach for it the following night. And then the tin box moved from the nightstand to the top drawer of the dresser, and then from the top drawer to the bottom drawer, and the distance it traveled was not measured in inches, but in the specific weight of a thing that used to be a compass point and had become something else. She went to work. She went to all 3 jobs. She arrived on time. She performed each task with the same precision she had always brought because her body knew the schedule, and the schedule did not account for whatever was happening underneath it. She turned Mr. Washington gently. She filed insurance claims at the dental office. She vacuumed the conference rooms at the law office. But something had changed. Not in the work, in the worker. Something behind her eyes had rearranged itself in a way that was not visible from a distance, but was visible to anyone standing close enough to look. The woman beside her at the nursing station noticed it. The office manager at the dental clinic noticed it. Nobody said anything because Ruth was the kind of person whose competence made people assume her well-being, and competence is the most convincing mask there is. Ernestine Okafor noticed. Ernestine was 58 years old. She had been a nurse's aide at Maplewood for 11 years. She had come from Lagos when she was 34 and had worked in hospitals and care facilities ever since, first in New York, then in Atlanta, the long geography of immigrant work. She was quiet in the way of people who listen more than they speak and who know the difference between hearing and understanding. She did not ask Ruth what had happened. She did not say, "Are you all right?" or "Is something wrong?" or "Do you want to talk about it?" She had been alive long enough to know that some people do not answer those questions, even when the answer is obvious, and that asking them can sometimes close a door instead of opening one. What she did instead was leave a container of food on Ruth's locker shelf on a Tuesday morning. Jollof rice with chicken covered in foil, still warm. On the foil, a piece of masking tape with 4 words written in blue ink. "You look like you forgot to feed yourself." Ruth opened her locker at 5:45 a.m. and saw the container. She stood looking at it for a moment. She picked it up. She could feel the warmth through the foil. She read the note. She took it to the break room and sat down and opened it and ate. It was the first meal in weeks that she actually tasted, not the act of eating which she had continued the way you continue all mechanical things, the tasting, the specific awareness of food as something other than fuel. The rice was seasoned in a way that reminded her of nothing in her own life, which was part of why it worked. It belonged to someone else's kitchen, someone else's hands, someone else's care, and receiving it required nothing from her except sitting still long enough to eat. She finished it. She washed the container in the break room sink. She returned it to Ernestine's locker with the masking tape still on it. She did not write a note back. Ernestine did not expect one. The containers continued. Every Tuesday, sometimes Thursday. Always warm, always covered in foil, always with a note written in blue ink on masking tape. Drink some water. Eat before shift. Your shoes are getting loose, tighten them. Ruth ate. She drank. She tightened her shoes. She said nothing about any of it, and Ernestine asked nothing about any of it, and the two women existed in a specific kind of silence that was not empty, but was full of the thing that happens when one person decides to pay attention to another without requiring anything in return. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the food began, Ruth collapsed on the 3rd floor of the law office. She was vacuuming the East Conference Room. She felt the floor tilt. She felt her vision narrow to a point, and then the point went dark. She fell. The vacuum kept running beside her on the carpet. The security guard found her 8 minutes later on his rounds. He called 911. The ambulance came. She was taken to Grady Memorial. The ER doctor was younger than Marcus, and he told her she was severely anemic, dehydrated, and showing early markers of renal insufficiency. He told her she needed rest. He told her she needed follow-up care with a nephrologist. He told her she needed to stop working 3 jobs. She said, "I will." She was discharged the following morning. She took the bus to Maplewood. She clocked in at 5:15 a.m. She went to room 14. She turned Mr. Washington. Her hands shook while she did it, a tremor fine enough that the patient could not feel it, but steady enough that she could. She had never known how to stop. Stopping was not a skill she had ever been taught. Her mother had not taught her how to stop. The world had not taught her how to stop. She knew how to start. She knew how to continue. She knew how to manage the envelope and swallow the ibuprofen and drive to the next shift and wash the uniform and set the alarm and get up and do it again. She knew all the verbs of forward motion. She did not know the verb for standing still. Ernestine was in the hallway when Ruth came out of room 14. She looked at Ruth. She looked at the way Ruth was holding the wall with her left hand, not leaning on it, just touching it the way you touch something when your body is making decisions your mind has not approved. Ernestine said nothing that morning, but the following week she began asking questions. Not about the ceremony, not about Marcus. Small questions, practical ones. When did you last eat? How many hours did you sleep? When was your last day off? Ruth answered them, the way she answered all questions briefly and without detail. Ernestine listened the way she always listened, with the full attention of a woman who understood that the answers to small questions sometimes contained the shapes of larger ones. She was beginning to form a plan. She had not told Ruth about it yet. She had not told anyone. She was a woman who acted before she announced, and the action she was considering was not small. Ernestine Okafor had come to the United States from Lagos when she was 34 years old with a nursing certificate, 2 suitcases, and the specific understanding that the world does not owe you anything, but that you owe the world your attention. She had worked in hospitals and care facilities for 22 years, first in Brooklyn, then in Newark, then in Atlanta. Each city a chapter in the long book of a woman who moved toward work the way water moves toward low ground naturally and without complaint. She had 3 children, all grown, all living in different cities. She called each of them on Sundays. The calls lasted exactly as long as they needed to and not a minute longer, because Ernestine was not a woman who confused talking with caring. Caring was what you did on Tuesdays and Thursdays and the ordinary mornings when no one was watching. Talking was what you did when the caring needed words, which was less often than most people thought. She had a phrase she used, not often, only when it mattered. The body tells the truth even when the mouth is still deciding. She had learned this in labor rooms in Lagos, where she had trained as a midwife before switching to general nursing. She had learned it watching women in the final hours of delivery when the body took over and the mind stepped aside, and whatever was true about that person became visible in a way that no amount of composure could hide. She had been watching Ruth's body for 6 months. She had watched the tremor in the right hand get worse. She had watched the way Ruth braced herself against the wall when she thought no one was looking. She had watched Ruth eat less and move slower and carry herself with the specific rigidity of a person who is using discipline to compensate for something that discipline cannot fix. She had watched all of this, and she had said nothing, because saying something requires knowing what to say, and for 6 months she had not known. After Ruth collapsed, she knew. She started with the food, because food was immediate and required no explanation. She started with HR because insurance was a practical matter, and practical matters were within her reach. But the thing that mattered, the action that would change the direction of everything, started with her daughter Adeze and a laptop screen on a Wednesday evening in Ernestine's kitchen. She had asked ADS to help her find someone on the internet. She did not use the word internet naturally. She used it the way people use words from a language they learned late, with precision but without ease. Adeze asked who she was looking for. Ernestine said, "The son of a woman I work with. He is a doctor. His name is Marcus Delane." Adeze found him in less than a minute. LinkedIn. Dr. Marcus Delane, resident internal medicine at a hospital Ernestine recognized because she had applied there once years ago and had not gotten the position. His profile photograph showed him in a white coat standing beside 3 other people in what appeared to be a living room. A man in a blazer, a woman with short hair and gold earrings, a younger man who looked like the woman's son. They were all smiling. Marcus was in the center. He looked like he belonged to them. Ernestine looked at the photograph for a long time. She looked at the woman with the gold earrings. She looked at Marcus's face. She understood something in that photograph that she could not have explained if someone had asked her to, but that she recognized the way she recognized the truth in a laboring woman's body. She recognized the shape of a man standing in the wrong family. She asked Adeze to find a phone number. Adeze found the hospital's main line. Ernestine wrote it down on a piece of paper in the handwriting of someone who had learned to write in a school where penmanship was considered a form of respect. She put the paper in her purse. She thanked Adeze. She washed the dinner dishes. She went to bed. She called the following morning from the parking lot of Maplewood before her shift. She called the hospital. She asked for Dr. Marcus Delane. She was transferred. He picked up on the 4th ring. His voice was professional and efficient and slightly impatient in the way of residents who are always between one task and the next. She said, "My name is Ernestine Okafor. I work with your mother at Maplewood Senior Living. She collapsed last week at her evening job. She was taken to the emergency room. She has been diagnosed with anemia and early kidney disease. She did not call you because she did not want to interrupt your new life. I am calling because someone should." The line was quiet. She could hear the hospital behind him, the distant sounds of pages and machines, and the specific noise of a building full of people who are sick and people who are trying to make them better. He did not speak. She said one more thing. She said it because it was the truth, and because the truth was what she had come to deliver, and because delivering it required nothing more than opening her mouth and letting the words out. She said, "I have watched her hands shake for 6 months. She still makes the beds gentler than anyone I know." She hung up. She had said what needed saying. She put her phone in her purse. She walked into Maplewood. She clocked in. She went to work. Marcus stood in the hospital corridor with the phone in his hand. The call had lasted 7 seconds. He knew this because the screen showed the duration, the way screens showed durations precisely and without any understanding of what the numbers contain. He put the phone in his coat pocket. He walked to the restroom at the end of the hall. He pushed the door open. He stood at the sink. He looked at his hands. They were a doctor's hands. Clean. The nails trimmed short. The skin smooth from the alcohol-based sanitizer he used 40 times a day. No calluses, no cracks, no tremor. They were hands that had been trained to diagnose, to palpate, to read the body the way a musician reads a score, with precision and fluency and the specific confidence of someone who has been taught by excellent teachers in excellent rooms. He looked at his hands and he thought about his mother's hands. He did not decide to think about them. The thought arrived the way Ernestine's phone call had arrived, without warning and without permission. His mother's hands. The dry knuckles. The crack across the right palm that never fully healed because she never stopped using it. The specific warmth of those hands when she held his face as a child, cupping his cheeks with her palms the way you cup water gently, because you know it will slip through if you are not careful. He thought about her hands on his back when he was sick, rubbing small circles between his shoulder blades at 2 inches the morning while he coughed. He thought about her hands in the kitchen, stirring rice, cutting bread, opening envelopes that contained bills she never let him see. He thought about her hands lacing up boots and pushing vacuum cleaners and filing papers and turning elderly people in their beds with a gentleness that a stranger on the phone had noticed and described in a single sentence that was now lodged in his chest like a piece of glass. She still makes the beds gentler than anyone I know. He turned on the faucet. He washed his hands. The soap was clinical and odorless. He watched the water run over his fingers, over the clean, smooth skin that had never carried the smell of antiseptic from a nursing home, or the residue of industrial cleaning products, or the specific roughness that comes from 12 years of manual labor performed across 3 jobs without a single day off. His hands healed people. His mother's hands had healed him, and he had not known she was sick. He dried his hands. He took out his phone. He opened the call log. He scrolled back. He found what he was looking for. 4 missed calls from Ruth Delane on the day of his graduation. He looked at the timestamp. The calls had come within 40 minutes of each other. 2:14 p.m. 2:22 p.m. 2:31 p.m. 2:38 p.m. No voicemails. She had called 4 times and left no message. He understood now why she had not left a message. She had not trusted her voice. She had called because her body needed to do something, and calling was the only action available, and each time the voicemail picked up, she had hung up because she could not say what needed to be said without the sound of it betraying what she was feeling, and she would not give him that. She would not give anyone that. He put the phone back in his pocket. He leaned against the sink. He stayed there for a long time. He did not cry. He was aware of something pressing against the inside of his chest, something that had been building since the phone call and was now occupying a space that made breathing slightly harder, the specific sensation of a truth that has been avoided for years, arriving all at once. He knew what he needed to do. He knew the way you know things in the body before you know them in the mind, the way his mother's body had known the alarm before the alarm went off. He knew. He was not yet able to move toward it because moving toward it meant moving away from everything he had built around himself for the past 6 years, the identity, the belonging, the version of Marcus Delane, who lived in a house with a circular driveway and called a woman with gold earrings by a name that was getting shorter every year. He left the restroom. He went back to work. He saw patients. He wrote notes. He answered pages. He did everything the day required of him, because his body knew the schedule, the way Ruth's body knew the schedule, and the schedule did not account for whatever was happening underneath. But the sentence would not leave. It sat in the center of his thinking like a stone in a current. The water moved around it, but the stone did not move. She still makes the beds gentler than anyone I know. He carried it through the afternoon. He carried it through rounds. He carried it into the evening when he drove to the Ashford house and parked in the circular driveway and walked through the green front door. Dinner was at 7:30. It was always at 7:30. Victoria had made something with salmon and a salad with ingredients that had specific names Marcus had learned to recognize over the past several years. Dr. Ashford was at the head of the table. Derek was across from Marcus. Victoria was beside her husband talking about something that had happened at a board meeting that morning. Then she turned to Marcus. She said she had been speaking with Dr. Ashford about an opening in his practice group, a junior position, internal medicine with a cardiology focus. It would be an excellent fit. The pay was strong. The mentorship would be direct. She said this the way she said all things, with the smooth confidence of a woman accustomed to arranging rooms and outcomes with equal facility. Marcus put down his fork. He said, "Mrs. Ashford, my mother collapsed last week. She has been working 3 jobs since I was in high school. She sold her house to pay for my medical school tuition. Did you know that?" The table was quiet. Dr. Ashford stopped chewing. Derek looked at his plate. Victoria looked at Marcus. She said, "I knew she worked hard. I did not know the specifics." The word specifics entered the room and sat down. It was a word that meant everything and admitted nothing. It was a word that drew a line between knowing and caring, between seeing a woman and seeing what was happening to her. Victoria had seen Ruth at school pickups and parent conferences, and the one time Ruth had come to the Ashford house to collect Marcus and had stood in the foyer in her cleaning company uniform, and Victoria had offered her a glass of water, and Ruth had said no thank you and left. Victoria had seen all of that, and had filed it under hardworking, and had not looked closer because looking closer was not required of her, and the world does not require you to look at things that are not your responsibility. I did not know the specifics. It was not a lie. It was the truth of a person who had chosen not to look. Marcus said, when I called you, Mom, on that stage, did you correct me? Victoria was still. Her hands were on the table, one on either side of her plate. She did not move. The question hung in the air between them, the specific quality of a question that is not really a question because both people already know the answer. She had not corrected him. She had stood up. She had accepted the applause. She had placed her hand on her chest. She had been photographed. She had been thanked. And she had not said, I am not his mother. His mother is in row 14. She had not. Marcus looked at her face. He saw something he had not expected to see. Not guilt, not shame, something closer to recognition. The expression of a person realizing for the first time that a thing they had been doing without thinking had a cost they had not been paying. He pushed his chair back. He stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam anything. He reached into his pocket and took out the key to the front door, the key Victoria had given him 2 years ago when he began staying regularly. He placed it on the kitchen counter beside the salt shaker. He looked at it there on the granite surface, a small brass key that represented a door he had been walking through for years. A door that had been easy to walk through because someone else had been holding it open. He said, thank you for everything you have done for me. He said it quietly, and he meant it because Victoria had done things for him, and gratitude was not something he owed less of because the rest of the equation had changed. But the equation had changed. He walked to the front door. He opened it. He did not close it loudly. He closed it the way you close a door when you understand that the sound of it is not the point. The point is that you are on the other side now, and you are not going back through. He stood on the porch of the Ashford house in the evening air. The circular driveway, the green door behind him, the neighborhood quiet and manicured and lit by the specific warm glow of houses where people have never had to sell anything to pay for anything. He took out his phone. He did not call Ruth. Not yet. He was not ready. He needed to be something other than what he had been when he stood on that stage, and becoming that required more than a phone call. It required showing up. And showing up required knowing what to bring. He did not know yet, but he was closer than he had been that morning. The stone in the current had not moved. She still makes the beds gentler than anyone I know. He got in his car and drove. He knocked on the door of the studio apartment on Piedmont at 6:14 inches the evening. He knew she would be home because he knew her schedule. He had always known her schedule. He had simply stopped paying attention to it the way you stop paying attention to things that are always there, the way you stop hearing a clock that has been ticking your entire life. Ruth opened the door. She was wearing the cleaning company polo, the navy blue one with the logo on the back. Her shoes were on. Her keys were in her hand. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly, without performance, without any rearrangement of her face to make the moment easier for the person standing in front of her. She said, I have work in 40 minutes. He said nothing. She stepped aside. He walked in. The apartment was 400 square feet. He understood this not because he measured it, but because his body understood the dimensions the way a doctor's body understands a room, by the amount of space between the walls and the number of steps it would take to cross it. 4 steps from the door to the kitchen counter. 3 steps from the counter to the bed. The bed was a single. The sheets were white and tight at the corners, made with the specific precision of a woman who had spent 12 years making beds for other people and could not bring herself to leave her own unmade. He stood in the center of the room, and he looked at it the way Carver had looked at that house on Audubon Street, not with his mind, but with his body, absorbing each object as a piece of evidence in a case he had refused to examine until now. The cleaning company polo hanging on the back of the door, a second one identical folded on the dresser, 2 uniforms because the schedule required her to wash one while wearing the other, and there was no margin for error. The ibuprofen on the kitchen counter. He picked up the bottle. It was nearly empty. He looked at the dosage on the label. He looked at the remaining count. He did the arithmetic the way doctors do arithmetic automatically, and with the specific clarity that comes from years of calculating dosages, and the number he arrived at, told him she had been taking more than the recommended amount for a long time. The compression socks drying on the shower rod. The shoes by the door with the worn left heel. The envelope in the top drawer of the dresser, which he did not open but which he recognized for what it was because he had grown up watching her manage envelopes. Then he saw the tin box. It was on the bottom drawer of the dresser. Not the nightstand, not beside the bed where it had lived for years. It had been moved. He understood what the moving meant. He picked it up, he opened it. The card was inside, wrapped in tissue paper. He unwrapped it. "Mom, when I'm a doctor, I'll buy you a house with a garden." The pencil had faded to a ghost of itself. The paper was soft at the edges from years of being held by the same hands night after night. His handwriting at 8 years old, the letters slanting right because he was left-handed, the apostrophes missing because he had not yet learned them, the promise large and clean and absolute in the way that only a child's promises can be because children do not yet know what promises cost. His hands were shaking. He noticed this with the clinical detachment of a doctor observing a symptom, and then the detachment collapsed and he was not a doctor holding a piece of paper. He was a son holding the weight of 12 years of ibuprofen and envelopes, and worn left heels and compression socks, and 3 jobs and a sold house, and a woman who had read these words every night and had moved the box to the bottom drawer after the ceremony because the words had become too heavy to keep close. His legs made a decision. He sat down on the floor, not on the bed, not on the chair, the floor, because the floor was what was available when the body stopped cooperating and the mind had nothing left to offer in the way of structure. He sat on the linoleum of his mother's studio apartment in his white coat with the card in his hands, and he did not perform anything. He did not explain. He did not apologize with words because the words he had were not adequate for what they would need to carry, and he knew this the way you know things you cannot yet say. Ruth looked at her son on the floor. She had seen this before, not this specific thing, but the shape of it, the shape of a person arriving at the end of whatever they had been holding up and finding that the holding was finished. She had seen it in patience. She had seen it in herself on the kitchen floor the day the graduation invitation arrived. The same linoleum, the same position. She stood in the doorway of her own apartment, and she looked at him, and she made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, a quiet one, the kind of decision that happens in the body before the mind has given permission. She sat down. Not close. Not yet. She sat on the floor across from him, with her back against the kitchen cabinet, the same cabinet she had leaned against on the morning she read his name on that invitation, and she left the distance between them, because the distance was not hostility. It was the appropriate space of a woman who had been carrying something alone for a very long time, and needed to see what he would do with the space before she closed it. He said, "I called her Mom." She said, "I know." He said, "I was wrong." The silence lasted longer than any silence should. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere in the building, a television. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening in a city that was not aware of what was happening in this specific room, on this specific floor. She said, "You were not wrong about needing something I could not give you. You were wrong about thinking that meant I was not enough." He looked at her. She looked at him. She was not performing forgiveness. She was not performing anything. She was sitting on the floor of her apartment in her cleaning company uniform with her keys still in her hand, and she was telling him the truest thing she knew, which was that love is not measured by what you are able to provide. It is measured by what you are willing to lose. And she had been willing to lose everything, including him, and she had lost him, and she was still here, and the floor was holding both of them, and that was enough for now. He put the card down on the floor between them. He took out his phone. He dialed a number. He said, "This is Dr. Delane. I need to switch my shift tomorrow. I will not be available until noon." He hung up. He looked at Ruth. He said, "I am driving you to the doctor tomorrow morning." "I am not asking." She looked at him. She was still holding her keys. She had been holding them since she opened the door, gripping them in her right hand, the hand that shook the hand that had been lacing boots and turning patients and filing claims and pushing vacuum cleaners for 12 years without stopping. She was holding those keys the way she held everything tightly, because holding tightly was the only way she knew. She put them down. She set them on the floor beside the card, the small sound of metal on linoleum. She nodded. She did not say you do not have to. She did not say I am fine. She did not reach for any of the phrases she had been using to keep people at a distance for 12 years. She nodded. That was all. And in that nod was the first time in 12 years that Ruth Delane allowed someone else to carry something for her. Marcus stood up. He went to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. There were eggs, there was bread, there was a jar of peanut butter that was almost empty. He took out the eggs, he took out the bread. He found a pan under the counter. He turned on the stove. Ruth sat on the chair by the kitchen counter and watched her son make scrambled eggs in her apartment. She watched his hands. They were a doctor's hands, clean, smooth, no calluses. They moved with precision and care, cracking the eggs, stirring them in the pan, the specific competence of hands that had been trained to be gentle with things that are fragile. She had taught him that, not in medical school. In this kitchen, in the old kitchen on the old street, when he was small and she was young, and the promise was still written in fresh pencil and everything was still possible. His hands were cooking for her. Her hands had cooked for him for 18 years. The circle was closing. Not completely, not all at once, but the hands that she had rubbed and held and bandaged and watched grow from small to large, those hands were now holding a spatula and scraping eggs onto a plate and setting it in front of her the way she had set 1,000 plates in front of him, and the gesture was so ordinary and so specific that it contained everything that needed to be said without either of them saying it. They ate. He asked about Ernestine. Ruth told him. She told him about the containers of food, the notes on masking tape, the questions that were not really questions but were a kind of watching the specific attention of a woman who had decided that Ruth was worth seeing. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, I need to thank her. Ruth said she does not want thanks. She wants you to show up. He looked at her. He understood what she meant. Showing up was not dramatic. It was not the thing you told people about at dinners, or wrote into speeches, or performed on stages in front of 400 people. It was the thing you did on a Tuesday morning, when no one was watching and nothing required it except the specific understanding that someone you loved was still here and still deserved your presence. Showing up was eggs in a pan and a ride to the doctor and keys set down on a floor. Showing up was what his mother had done every morning at 440 for 12 years, and what Ernestine had done every Tuesday with a container of rice, and what he had failed to do for so long that the failing had become a structure he lived inside without knowing he was living inside it. He washed the dishes. She dried them. They stood side by side at the small sink in the small kitchen, and the apartment that had been built for one person held 2 people, and it held them well enough. The following morning, Marcus pulled his car up to the curb outside the apartment at 815. Ruth came out wearing a blue shirt and the black flats. She got in. She put on her seatbelt. She held her purse on her lap the way she always held it with both hands. They drove through the city. The morning was warm and clear. A man walked a dog. A woman carried grocery bags. Life, in its ordinary way, indifferent to the specific private thing happening inside this one car on this one street. Ruth opened her purse. She took out the tin box. She opened it and took out the card wrapped in tissue paper and unwrapped it and held it for a moment. Then she held it out to Marcus. He took it with one hand, the other on the wheel. He looked at it, his handwriting at 8 years old, the faded pencil, the soft paper, the missing apostrophes. She said, I kept your promise for you. Now you can keep it yourself. He looked at the card. He looked at the road. He folded it carefully and put it in the breast pocket of his white coat, the pocket over his heart, the pocket where he kept his pen and his badge, and the small tools of the life she had paid for. The card disappeared into the white fabric, and Ruth watched it go, and she thought it finally arrived where it was supposed to be. Not a house, not a garden, just a pocket close to the chest of the person who wrote it, carried by the person who could now understand what it had cost to keep. They drove to the hospital. He parked. He came around and opened her door. She got out. They walked in together. He did not hold her hand. She did not need him to. They walked side by side the way 2 people walk when they have decided to go in the same direction without needing to discuss it. Some debts are not repaid in money or houses or gardens. They are repaid in mornings like this one. In a car on a Tuesday, driving to a doctor's appointment, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. In the specific, ordinary act of showing up. Ernestine Okafor never asked for thanks. She went to work the next morning the way she always did. She clocked in at 5:15. She went to room 14. She turned Mr. Washington gently. She checked vitals. She left a container of jollof rice and chicken on Ruth's locker shelf with a piece of masking tape on the foil. The tape said, "Eat before your appointment." She did not know that Marcus had come back. She did not know about the eggs, or the floor, or the card in the pocket. She did not need to know. The knowing had never been the point. The doing was the point. It had always been the doing. The world does not always give you back what it takes from you. It takes houses and years and health and the specific trust of a child who used to sit on your kitchen floor and hold your hand and make promises in pencil. It takes all of that, and it does not apologize and it does not explain. But sometimes, if you are patient and if someone along the way decides you are worth a phone call they did not have to make, it gives you something close. Not the thing itself. Not the house or the garden or the years you lost. Something close. Close enough to stand in. Close enough to begin. Close was where you started. Thank you for watching. Before you go, tell us, who is your Ernestine? Who showed up for you when the people who were supposed to did not? See you in the next.